Oh, I am such an idiot. I didn't hit the go live button. So I was streaming from I tell you what, I don't know if anybody is in here listening. So I am inclined.
Start it.
I'm inclined. Are you inclined to restart it?
No, just hit start.
Okay. Well,
We
okay,
haven't covered
fine.
anything that incredible.
I hit started. We started talking about Bidenomics. Catch up
Right.
for you. So this is all screwed up today. Sorry about that. I didn't start the live stream because I'm an idiot. So forgive me. So we started talking about Bidenomics, and as a result, we were starting to look at how expensive things are. And so we're just looking at vehicles. We have found one at car dealerships, a vehicle under $20,000. One. Everything else is above that. Now, this is the Jeep Compass. I don't want to highlight it. So $26,985, $27,000 for the worst Jeep you can buy. So when we look at that, oh, and by the way, let's just look San Diego apartment rentals. Let's just look at that. I mean, I happen to be in San Diego. Obviously, in many places in the country, this is going to be a lot cheaper than San Diego. So brand new apartments for rent in San Diego. Okay, this seems to be let's go to apartments.com. There we go. Anywhere in San Diego. Okay, 1 to 2 bedroom apartments for $27.98 to $45.88. That is a senior citizens. Pinnacle Broadway, so downtown San Diego, $22.83, $27.42 for a studio, $2,700 a month for a studio apartment. If we come up here, let's see, this is sort of up way up north. Call. But okay, Ridgewood Village, which is way up north in San Diego, $23.91 for a 1 bedroom. $27.62 for a 1 bedroom. $22.30, $22.59. So basically a 1 bedroom apartment, you're looking at between $2,000 and $2,500 a month, depending on where you want to go.
And these places aren't next door to San Diego.
Oh no, we're up in Rancho Bernardo at this point. We're kind of way up north up here. That's Ventana. So this is North San Diego. So we have some stuff out here. If we go onto the coast,
Oh God.
Oceanside, not that bad. Over in Solana Beach, $22.50 for an apartment. Here's one, $18.95. Boy, this picture makes it look good. $1,800.
But that's all there is.
Yeah, I wonder about these apartments. But and of course, the closer you get to downtown, 1 bedroom, $29.75. Assuming, of course, that you want to live in downtown San Diego. But this whole Bidenomics thing is not working as good as Joe Biden thinks it is. And I don't know why, but this seems to be what the Biden administration is talking about. But the House Democrats are just saying, yeah, we're not doing a very good job of framing this issue. Well, you're not doing a good job of framing this issue because you know what? Here's the thing. You can point to GDP growth and you can point to I don't know, whatever you would like to in terms of national macroeconomic statistics. And you can make the argument that, hey, well, things are really doing well. Are they? Because remember, we're talking about GDP growth and we're measuring it in nominal terms. And if you have a lot of inflation, that makes nominal GDP growth look good on a year-over-year basis on nominal terms. But on a real basis, it probably doesn't look all of that great. So if you were to go back chained $19.90 or whatever the current figure the government is using to account for inflation, I'm pretty sure that it won't be 5.8% GDP growth in the last quarter. And how much of that GDP growth is nominal, not real GDP growth? And that's always the question. That headline figure of GDP growth looks really good. But the reality is, I know what it costs me to buy groceries.
Yeah. Oh, and there's also the fact that I think almost a quarter if not more, of GDP is now being spent by government.
Well, yeah, there is that. We do count government spending as GDP, as part of GDP, even though, you know,
It's always been a bit of a question whether that should be included or not. I mean, I don't really have a problem with it. I mean, it's going to get spent most times anyway. But
yeah, but the thing is, what I think GDP, when you put all government spending into GDP, and look, there's a reason for that, because the government does buy things like tanks and jet airplanes and destroyers and things like that, which we classify as durable goods, which I suppose is true right up until the point that somebody pulls the trigger, in which case they become substantially less durable. But let's put that aside. 2/3 of government spending on Social Security and Medicare. Okay, in the Medicare part, at least medical services are being delivered.
Right.
And doctors and nurses are getting paid. But what about Social Security, where I'm just sending you a check each month? I mean, presumably you're doing something with that check. I mean, presumably you're spending it on something, but isn't that already counted in the purchase of goods and services by private individuals? So, and when you talk about, GDP is up. Yeah, well, GDP includes government spending, and the government has decided to spend, $5 trillion this year. Okay, how much of that is actual productive? And indeed, most of what the government, spends is in salaries. Well, it is for transfer payments.
Oh, but in salaries, yeah.
And
no,
much
you're
of
right. Salaries is taking the most, yeah.
And much of the rest of the stuff that is not the mandated spending, like Social Security, Medicare, like all of the executive branch spending, which takes up about 30% of the federal budget. Much of that is salaries for the, hundreds of thousands of federal workers out there. And of course, their private spending goes into the as well. But it's very tricky, but it does have the effect, unintended or not, and how you get past this, I don't know, but it does have the unintended effect of all that government spending inflating the GDP. I mean, the government could spend $20 trillion a year, and we could all be eating Alpo.
Oh, wow, look at the GDP.
And GDP growth would be great.
Yeah, it does intuitively seem like there's some double counting there.
Yeah. And by the way, much of that money doesn't exist. That's borrowed money.
Well, that's the other part too.
So that is money that is being siphoned out of the productive economy through investment in treasury bonds and then going into the government to be spent. Is that the most efficient way of doing things? I'm not entirely sure. Much of government spending is really inefficient too. For example, you're on AFDC, right? The government is not going to send you a check for $400 a month for you to use on food. What the government is going to send you are $400 worth of food stamps.
Mm-hmm.
And if you only spend $315 of that, that's very inefficient. You've lost $85 of some notional value that never gets spent. So there is a delta between the amount of money that the government is budgeting for that program and the amount of money that is actually getting spent out of that program. And then plus with that program, they get to dictate what food you can buy and what you can't buy, what they'll cover and what they won't cover, because obviously the government needs to tell you how to shop for food because you can't do it yourself, obviously. Because you're poor, so you're just presumed to be incompetent, I suppose. But there's, all these kind of inefficiencies are in there. And so the Biden administration talks about GDP like it's a miracle figure. That ain't necessarily so. And I think even though the House Democrats won't say this because they can't, the reality is that Bidenomics for the average person is not a compelling slogan. They know it and they know why, because they know that average people are not having as great a time of it as they might have, a decade ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's for better or worse. I mean, all it really is propaganda for the media to spread, which they know it will spread. It's just getting too hard to put any kind of realistic spin on the economy. They just have to resort to straight up lies. I mean, what Biden was touting Bidenomics yesterday or the day before, saying there was 0% inflation in October. It's like, well, no, it was 3.2% on an annualized basis. It just didn't go down or up. It's still increasing by 3.2%.
Yeah, so I can see why they're, backing up on that. And look, it's not working with voters because voters, if you look at presidential approval polls.
It's in our faces, right?
Yeah, voters, if you look at presidential approval polls, just know he's not doing that good of a job.
And he's getting hammered from both the left and the right, too. So,
yeah.
I mean, there are no policies here that are satisfying anybody.
Well, one of the... Bill Clinton was the master of triangulation, right?
Yeah.
Try to find some policy path that gives you the greatest level of satisfaction for the most number of people. And it worked in the 1990s, but I mean, good Lord, that was 30 years ago. Hard as it is to believe.
Ugh.
Yeah, ugh. The years, they go by, don't they? So I don't think that with the way American politics has become polarized over the past 30 years, I don't know that triangulation is a strategy that works anymore. And
the sides are too far apart.
Yeah.
There is almost nothing common between the left and the right anymore. I really struggled to find things. How the left is treating children nowadays is I think that's kind of the last strap that was holding us together at all. There's no commonality there. How can you have a policy that binds and satisfies two completely opposed positions?
And it's not just it's not the fact that the positions were opposed. I mean, look, if we go back to the 1960s or 70s or 80s, there were a lot of things where Republicans and Democrats were opposed. But if you were to draw a Venn diagram, those circles would have a lot of intersection, more and less at various times. But now our Venn diagram is this. And that space in the middle is just open. And I think both sides have become so ideologically closed off that there is no policy that will satisfy everybody. Because if you go slightly to the left of this circle, you're a Nazi. And if you go slightly to the right of this circle and slightly to the left of this circle, you're a commie. Where is your common ground? That Venn diagram is two discrete circles at this point. Even if, and I'm not even saying this is true because it's not, but even if Joe Biden was, like Bill Clinton, somebody who was always trying to find the middle way, I don't think he would be successful. I also think that Joe Biden is not trying to find a middle way. I think that Joe Biden is more interested, and based on the policies we've seen coming out of him, more inclined to move to the left than he is to the right. But as a sign of how bad the ideological divide has gotten, he's gone more to the left than most people are comfortable with, and yet the activists in his own party, he hasn't gone left enough for them. So, this idea of America being a center-right country, it's really not. America is two countries. Oh. It is a cultural Marxist country, and it is a very socially conservative country. And that space in the middle just hardly exists anymore. Occasionally you can find, somebody who used to be considered an old-style lefty who now sound like raging moderates. Is it because they're moderate? No, I don't think so. I think it's just because we have just been bathed in the ideological predispositions that have pulled the country apart into two ideologically opposed camps. And so somebody who, like Bill Maher, is a guy who you used to would have thought of as just a pure lefty. Sounds eminently reasonable on a whole bunch of things. Is that because Bill Maher has gotten more reasonable? No, I don't think so. I don't think he's actually changed his views on, well, anything. But the fact is, the center of gravity, a term that we may discuss a little bit later in connection with the raging incompetent Lloyd Austin at DOD, the center of gravity has shifted so much in each ideological camp. And I think this has been exacerbated. Wow, I'm just turning into a freaking ranter here. I think this has been exacerbated by the existence of cable news and by the fact that cable news programs have decided they're going to pick an ideological lane, they're going to stick with that, and they're going to cater to their audience. And we have lost anywhere where we could find a middle-of-the-road, objective source of news and information. And so we have been kind of forced into this ideological divide, and there are few, if any, bridges between those two divides, which makes me wonder if any president can be successful at this point.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because being successful electorally versus being successful
in a policy
governing.
sense. Yeah. Successfully governing.
I think those don't necessarily go together. I mean, look at Trump. Trump actually had a very successful policy-wise presidency. He had some bad things that he did. He had some rather clumsy things that he did, but he did a lot of good stuff as well. And we all felt it. The economy was doing well. Our foreign relations were doing well. We didn't get entangled in any other foreign adventures during his term. And there wasn't a lot of adventurism from anyone else either. So by all accounts, that's a pretty successful, policy-wise presidency. And yet he got voted out, allegedly.
Well, allegedly, he didn't get voted out. Allegedly, he had the election stolen from him. I wasn't going to get into this, but I think we have to discuss it. I want it out there. If he truly believes that the election was stolen, he truly believes that they cheated, and as he said, I believe yesterday, I believe that if they weren't cheating, we could win in New York and in New Jersey and in California. Okay, so what makes you think you can win this time? I mean, literally, right. What is if they are going to cheat, and you know they're going to cheat, and they're going to steal the election from you, then what is the point of campaigning this time? I mean, you know you're not going to win. You know you're not going to be president. You know that they're just going to steal the election from you again, and you don't have the power to prevent them from doing that. So what is the rationale for your campaign? So other than asking your supporters to help pay for your legal defense in all these different cases, I suppose that's a good reason for running. But outside of that, it's an intellectually inconsistent argument for running for president. They stole the White House from me. They're stealing elections. They're going to keep stealing it until we stop them. I have to run for president. Okay, but if they're going to steal the election for you, what's the point? It's like there's no logical A to B to C to get us to the step 3 profit, because step 2 doesn't have anything other than they're going to steal the election.
Right. I think part of the thought process there is that if we call them out and constantly call them out, hey, we see you cheating over there, that it can be controlled or at least exposed. I don't know if that's true or not, but I can understand the thinking. But otherwise, I mean, you're right. I mean, he set himself up into an intellectual trap. He cannot be consistent and say, well, they're going to cheat and deny me, but I'm also going to run anyway. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, well, we'll continue to follow that through the year. I have to admit, I'm fascinated to see what the first couple of primaries are going to look like. Because if you were to look at the polling, like certainly the national polling that we're seeing on the Republican race, I mean, it looks like Trump walks away with everything, right? I mean, he's got 50-60% approval rating.
Right.
But nobody has voted yet. Once somebody starts voting, then we have an idea. But
well, yeah, and the other thing with the primaries is it gives you a much more accurate view of how the electoral college will work. Whereas this national polling stuff, I mean, who cares? It's worthless. It's absolutely useless. It comes to determining where we are in this horse race. It doesn't reflect anything other than popular opinion amongst a small subset of people who may not be at all representative of their states or even their own communities. We don't know. So yeah, I mean, I don't put a lot of faith in polls now. I'm hoping other people aren't putting a whole lot of, although the Democrats are definitely panicking about the polls. And I will maintain, once again, I don't think Biden's going to be the nominee. I really don't.
Well, I have to admit, my idea that I promulgated the podcast after the election was that Joe Biden sticks around for 2 years and 1 day and then shuffles off, turns it over to Kamala Harris, and she gets to go in, tanned, rested, and ready for 2024. That didn't happen. Now that he has the office, he clearly doesn't want to leave it, and he wants to run again. I don't think he is intellectually capable of doing this for another 4 years. So I think he's just a bad.
He's never been intellectually.
Yeah, the first order problem is that Joe Biden is intellectually incapable to hold the presidency. Unfortunately, here we are. He's here.
Yeah.
And he's not at his best now. I mean, Joe Biden in his prime, in 1988, when he ran president and got thrown out of the race or had to leave the race because he was, plagiarizing Neil Kinnock's speeches from the British Labour Party leader. Even then, when one could argue that Joe was at his best, and I use that term advisedly, he wasn't capable of being president. He is far less capable now, and he's not going to become increasingly capable as he gets older.
Yeah, and he's none of the things that the people who prop him up say he is. He's not moderate. He's not avuncular. He is not at all what do they always call him? Not a divider, but a
uniter.
A uniter. He's the opposite of all these things. He's a nasty person. He's always been a nasty person. He cares not one whit for anybody other than himself. And he's got the reins of power and he doesn't want to give them up.
No, he has spent his entire career. He has spent 50 years trying to attain the job that he has now.
Yeah.
And in a rational government where you couldn't spend 50 years as an elected official, we would have already long forgotten about Joe Biden and his plane or his train trips back to Delaware on the weekends.
His million miles.
Yeah, he'd have been back in Delaware sometime in 1992 probably. So, but when we talk about his policy and about how he's trying to triangulate to the left. He's not trying to triangulate to the vast majority of the electorate.
Yes.
And hence...
Well, and that's a part of his problem, though, is that there is a split on the left as well. They're both far left, but the loudest among them are like the trans rights activists, And now he's got these Muslim activists in like Dearborn and places like that in Michigan and what's the other big are they all no there's a big one in I guess Wisconsin, and they're trying to split him away from the party and get somebody who is more endeared to their interests. There's also, the transgender people who they want somebody who will treat them like they already get treated, but with more gusto. I mean, there are plenty of splinter groups on the left who are perfectly willing to go their own way and not support the Democratic coalition. And then you've got the basically the political left who are like, whoa, we need everybody or we can't make this happen. And all we really want you to do is vote against Trump. That's really all you need to do. Yeah. Just know that if you do this, you're going to get Trump. So we have to scare you even more about Trump. And that seems to be their entire playbook, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, which I have to ask the question, would Donald Trump be more effective not running for president? Uh-oh, he's going to be back in a second. I'm right here. So my question is, would Donald Trump be more effective in the background, not running for president? Because the fact...
Well, it's interesting you asked that. Go ahead.
The fact is, he is not a uniting figure. People on the left universally hate him. Look, there are a lot of people on the right that hate him. There are people on the right that hate him so much they ended up being Democrats, like Liz Cheney. So, he has baggage that no one else has. Now, look, other Republicans who are running for president have baggage. I mean, Nikki Haley. I mean, if you want to talk about the RNC / corporatist / traditional I can't think of the term. The standard Republican candidate, the official type of Republican, the
old GOP.
What is the term for the people who run everything? The establishment. There you go. The establishment candidate. She's got Paul Ryan.
The Illuminati?
Yeah, the Illuminati. She's got that. I mean, like everybody has been. Chris Christie, who obviously has the transgender stuff that he signed while he was governor in New Jersey. Everybody's got baggage. But Trump's baggage strikes me as being special. In that he is just such a polarizing figure that one wonders if he might not have greater influence by not running for president than running for president. Because one thing that he does do is he does exactly what you just said. The Democrats get to use him as the, après moi la déluge.
Right.
So he becomes a reasonably potent fundraising argument for Democrats across the board.
Absolutely. And it's been interesting that his rise in the polls has been accompanied by his relative quietude. He still has had some, a bunch of rallies. He's got his Truth Social thing, but not to it except for the hardcore Trumpists. He's not out there, going nuts on Twitter all the time. So you do have to wonder how effective he'll be once we get into the actual campaign. The writing's written on the wall, and these are going to be the candidates.
Well, see, what we end up with, as we've talked about before, is we have two candidates that the majority of the electorate does not want to run for president.
Right.
Most voters do not want Joe Biden, and they do not want Donald Trump. All the polling I've ever seen, for whatever worth polling is, indicates to me that the two front runners are candidates that nobody wants. Nobody wants Biden because he's a disaster, and they've learned that, much as we did with Jimmy Carter, and they want him gone. but they don't want Trump back, whether it's mean tweets or whatever. They want a better choice. And as far as polling goes, at the moment, it doesn't look like they're going to get it. And if you look at, again, nationwide polling, Trump beats Biden. It's nationwide polling. Presidential elections aren't nationwide elections, so we don't care, other than maybe a general sense of the mood. And so there may be some nostalgia out there for Trump a year prior to the election in some sort of abstract sense. Whether that holds true next September, when suburban women have to ask themselves, am I going to pull the lever or tick the box or whatever it is for Donald Trump? And the traditional answer for suburban women has been no, I am not.
Right. Well, and the other thing is that the closer you get to the election, the more Democrats start to coalesce and come back home. Just because they're like, oh, God, I hate my guy, but I hate the other guy worse. I don't think there would be a lot of third party voting that would undermine Biden. But I mean, I'm saying that now. It's, a year away, a little less than a year away. But that's typically how it happens, is that the Democrats, at least most of them, come home. The worst thing that happens for them is that, the constituencies that they depend on to get their votes, blacks, other minorities, women, especially college educated women, suburban women, that they don't vote at all. And I think that might be a bigger issue when you have such hated candidates.
Yeah, what does turnout look like?
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to be 180 million. Well, I guess what was it last? Allegedly, it was 150 some million, almost 160 million.
Yeah, whatever 75 plus 81 is, that's what it was.
Right.
I'm not going to do that math in my head right now. The other problem, of course, is that at this point, any polling about the 2024 election is so far away that it still is in the minds of pretty much anybody, even those of us who are paying attention, is it is purely a hypothetical question.
Right.
If at some point in the future these two people are running, how do you feel about that right now? And that is the problem. It's how I feel right now. And how I feel right now, when it is largely a hypothetical exercise, may be entirely different than how I feel on October 28th, when it is a reality with which I have to contend.
Exactly.
So my opinion may be entirely different next October than it is right now, and that's true for pretty much everybody. So,
and there are a lot of world events, plenty of them churning right now, that probably won't see any kind of resolution by that time. I mean, I don't see how the Ukraine-Russian war finds a resolution between now and then, unless they both run out of armaments. I mean,
well, in Ukraine's case, it's not so much armaments as people, I think, although armaments are extremely important to them. Russia has a supply. This is how Russia always wins its wars. They sacrifice hundreds and hundreds of thousands of men to the meat grinder, but they have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of men to sacrifice. Now, that's not quite as true today as it would have been 50 years ago, because the Russian population is in decline and in pretty steep demographic decline. So that's not going to be true for Russia much longer. But Russia still is a country of 180-ish million people compared to 25 million in Ukraine.
Most of their successes in those type of wars have been defensive successes. Their history of acquiring, of taking over conquest has not been as good.
No, even in the wars that Russia has won, they have been enormously incompetent and sacrificed hundreds of thousands of men needlessly. But that's how they wage war. They just throw men at a problem until the problem is dead. And Ukraine does not have that luxury. And so it is possible when we talk about Ukraine, it is possible that at some point in the next year or so, that Ukraine and Russia are going to have to sit down, and Ukraine is probably going to have to swallow some territorial loss, because it's just difficult to see how over a long term, just with the disparity in manpower, that they can continue to throw the Russians off. I mean, the Russians are incompetent, but I don't presume that the Ukrainians are much more competent, largely because the majority of their military tradition is based in the Russian and Soviet military tradition. So I think it's diamond cut diamond in that sense. So for Ukraine to win, it still does seems difficult. I think the victory is that they prevented Russia from rolling over them, but that
absolutely
that
they've got to keep doing it.
Yes, and they've got to do it to the point where they can bring Russia to the table. But Russia is not going to accept half measures at the negotiating table if they think, it gets us back into the World War I problem. In 1917, nobody wanted to get together with Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg in Germany and say, hey, let's all get together at a peace conference somewhere and let's try to hammer out some sort of resolution. Because by that point, so much blood and treasure had been spent that the idea of a negotiated settlement was simply out the window. And no one on the Allied side would have been satisfied with anything other than a complete German capitulation. And I think,
especially France.
Yeah, and I think on the Russian side, no one is interested in anything but a complete capitulation on the side of Ukraine. So it's for as long as Ukraine can put men in the field and arm them, I think this is going to go on, because I don't think that Russia has any interest in a peace negotiation that does not get them all of Crimea and basically all of the Donbass.
Yeah. And I don't know how much Europe would invest in blood and treasure. I mean, obviously they'll invest a bunch in treasure, although they're relying mostly on us. And I'm scared of how much blood and treasure, we haven't committed any blood yet, but I'm afraid it's going to come to that. And I don't see that being resolved anytime soon. Not to mention whatever other, corollary actions or fall out of these machinations. So,
well,
I don't know. And then the whole Middle East, that's a powder keg.
One final thing to say: our problem with, as far as Ukraine goes, our problem with the Russia-Ukraine war is that we simply don't have any insight into what either country is doing internally, what arguments they're making, and what their manpower actually looks like. Both Ukraine and Russia are essentially lying to the entire world about what is actually going on. They're both exaggerating their victories and deprecating their losses. We don't really know. And again, in 1918, no one right up until, November realized that the German army was on the verge of collapse and that the entire thing was just going to collapse within weeks. And, on November 1st, if you'd have come in and said, the German army is going to collapse, the Kaiser is going to abdicate, and you're going to get an unconditional surrender from the German army by November 11th, nobody would have believed that. But it was nevertheless true. And so I think in Ukraine, we don't know, and we don't know what the outcome is, and we really don't know what level of resistance Ukraine can, in the third year, continue to provide against the Russians. But just looking at the number of people, we do know how many people the Russians can grab a hold of, and the Ukrainians can't. And as one of our people as one of our people in chat says, Ukraine seems to be having problems with younger men evading the draft.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that
just reminded me of that Ron White joke about, I don't know how many guys it would have taken to throw me out of that bar, but I knew how many they were going to use.
Yeah. The Israel Gaza thing, the Houthis in Yemen attacked 3 commercial vessels and a U.S. destroyer. Is it a destroyer or a cruiser? Our modern Navy has such weird ship classes. I'm not even sure what the difference is anymore. But they're attacking with drones. The Houthis are taking credit for it, obviously. And I wasn't going to talk about this yet, but I guess we will talk about it now. The Israeli Gaza thing is not going to go away. Now, it was said this week that Saudi Arabia, Jordan, in fact, pretty much all of the Arab nations are privately saying that they hope Israel destroys Hamas. If for no other reason than because it reduces Iranian influence in the region. And Iranian influence is something that none of these Sunni Arab nations want to see. And so they're sort of secretly on Israel's side. But the problem is, in terms of the Palestinians just absolutely, positively hate Israel. And that is not going to go away. Even if they destroy Hamas, there are still a couple of million people, 2 million people or so, in the Gaza Strip. And these are the same people who, after Israel left the Gaza Strip in 2005 and the occupation, or 2005, and the occupation ended, 12 months later, this is the population that elected Hamas as their government. Hamas has been the government of the Gaza Strip since 2006. There have been no subsequent elections, and we don't know for sure that in a post-Hamas election that, a new improved version of Hamas won't come along and still win an election there. But based on what we can tell from the feelings of the Palestinian people, they are not entirely dissatisfied with being governed by Hamas for whatever reason.
No.
Largely because they hate Israel. They
voted for Fatah, and I guess Hamas killed their leaders and kind of took it over. But yeah.
Yeah, well, Hamas basically took over from the PLO, the Palestinian Authority,
right,
and took over. So that brings me to something that I was kind of thinking of as an also-ran, but Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, also a former CENTCOM commander, so the guy who was in charge of the Middle East in the United States Army, he says, talking about Gaza and Israel, in this kind of a fight, the center of gravity is the civilian population. And if you drive them into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat. And my only response to that would be, you moron. They're the people who elected Hamas in the first place and who tossed out the PLO. They seem to be perfectly happy. This is not, U.S. soldiers tromping through the rice paddies of Vietnam to win the hearts and minds of the villagers. That battle, as far as I can tell, is over. And if you're identifying Palestinian public support as the center of gravity of this conflict, then you're a dolt.
Yeah, you're not changing their minds.
Yeah,
I mean, they've literally been bred to think, act, and feel this way. That's what they are taught from the time they are first taught anything, and that's their goal. It really is a death cult. It's an honor to die a martyr at the hands of the Israelis or the West.
Yeah, well, this is the Biden administration's Secretary of Defense, and who, when he had 4 stars on his shoulder, ran CENTCOM, the command that is responsible for the Mideast. And by the way, is also the guy who never appeared to have a plan for what victory meant or what an end of conflict meant in Afghanistan for his entire tenure at CENTCOM himself. And yet this is the guy in charge of defense policy.
Well, I mean, you and I talked about it a little bit before, but how this guy got as far as he has is, it's not a mystery, unfortunately, but it is rather shocking and dismaying because this guy he's just not cut out for this job. And unfortunately, I don't know who is. I, I don't know what kind of characters we have anymore at the upper echelons of our military. And there's a reason that trust and respect for the military is dropping rapidly. It's because they've lost their sense of purpose, and that comes from the top, including from the commander in chief.
Well, look, the thing that was said during the Obama administration, and that a lot of Army officers were saying as they reached their high year of tenure and they had to leave the service, was that Obama was politicizing the General Corps, that he was picking generals with whom he felt more political affinity than simply by competence.
Well, you could see that with his chiefs of staff. Yeah.
And I think, once you start picking colonels to become generals on a political basis, major generals to become lieutenant generals and so forth, that corrodes the institution in a way that will take as many years to reverse as it took to implement.
Unfortunately, yeah, because that culture now pervades right on down to the NCOs. That's the policy, and that's the culture that has been created and cultivated and grown for decades.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to beat that. Now, presidents can do that. Presidents can intervene in promotions, but in general, it's one of the sort of the dirty little secrets of how promotions work at the senior ranks in the U.S. military is that, though not exclusively, generals largely get to pick who is going to join them. And to a lesser extent, the three senior NCO ranks, E7, 8, and 9, they tend to have a voice in who gets picked to be a E7, 8, or 9 as well. So there's a lot more of that at the general grade, obviously, because most generals are far more entwined with what goes on in Washington than most senior master sergeants or sergeants major. However, the fact is, when you have a culture that is already set, it would take a very active president to start deciding what colonels get selected. And he would have to intervene more.
It's a lot of work too.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and you have to know who these people are because
right.
you largely trust the military to find these people. The trouble is,
right.
Once you find a couple of generals that you like and you can give them 4 stars, they get to take control over the promotion mechanism for everybody else ultimately. And so it becomes harder to root that out. Like I said, it takes as long to get out of that situation as it took to get into it.
Yeah.
And Lloyd Austin, to me, just seems like the perfect example of a fellow who has been repeatedly promoted past his competence.
I absolutely agree. And I think we can say that with a lot of people, unfortunately. And like you said, I mean, this has been growing for a long time. And to wring that out of the system, it can't be done overnight. I mean, unless you're just going to create a whole new military from scratch, that's
no, because the command
good.
Enforces the culture in their command too. And so this starts to filter down. And so what you end up with is, well, a military that hasn't actually won a real war since 1945.
Mm-hmm.
And these same people who presided over Iraq and Afghanistan all ended up with their 4 stars, and they all ended up setting policy and picking who their predecessors were going to be. And that's going to be hard for anything but a very activist president and a very detail-oriented president with some military background is going to be able to suss out. And of the 2 front-running candidates at the moment, neither of them have that capability.
And do any of the also-rans have that capability? I mean, maybe DeSantis, he at least served, I guess.
DeSantis was in the Navy. So
Yeah.
he was a Navy officer. So he has some military experience. He was a lawyer
He was JAG. He wasn't
and
front lines or anything.
And in the military, the Judge Advocate General's Corps and the Medical Corps are kind of special unto themselves. They don't exist in the same sort of environment that everybody else exists in. Because lawyers and doctors are kind of hard to find and attract and hire. And so they wear uniforms and they're technically in the military, but there's
anybody who's seen A Few Good Men knows this.
Yeah, there's a lot more leeway in how the lawyers and the legal and medical corps officers get treated as opposed to, combat arms, for example. They're little different stakes.
Son, have you ever served in a forward position? Have you ever had another man put his life in your hands?
Yeah. You're goddamn right, I ordered it. It's still one of the best scenes. Oh my
ever. God. Jack Nicklaus stole that fucking entire movie. And he was the bad guy.
Yeah. And he seemed so reasonable right up until the last minute. Okay, so let's switch gears here. We're still talking about Biden, though, but in this case, this week, the American auto dealers, nearly 4,000 of them, wrote a joint letter to the Biden administration telling him that this electric car thing isn't going to work. We've talked about this before, and we now have an EV mandate here. The Europeans have put in a 2035 or 2040, I believe. I don't remember off the top of my head. Similar EV mandate there. And we are pushing for these electric vehicles.
That nobody wants to buy.
And nobody wants to buy them. And the car dealerships are telling now, and I went to Axios for this story. I could have found it elsewhere. There was actually an Ars Technica story. And the lead line was something like, car dealerships, despite having made millions in profits over the last year, say that they can't sell EVs. It's interesting to note that car dealers have made a lot of money. It is entirely irrelevant to whether they can sell EVs, however. So I tried to find
one does not actually have anything to do with the other.
Yeah. So I tried to find a more neutral framing for the story, and I think I found it at Axios, as, by the way, one often does, surprisingly. 3,000.
I kind of like how Axios lays it out, too. Why it matters. Driving the news. I mean, they still have their own framing and whatever, but it is kind of interesting how they this is what Vox claimed it was going to be.
And never was.
Started.
Yeah.
And never was.
And look, Axios really isn't that either. Axios editorializes plenty depending on the topic.
It does.
But in this particular case, I think what you have are the people who sell cars are telling the Biden administration nobody is buying these things. Nobody wants them. First of all, they're too expensive. Second of all, they're too limited in range. They require too much time to recharge between uses. And
where the fuck do you recharge it?
Yeah, and where do you recharge it? I mean, sure, technically you could recharge at home by plugging it into a 120 volt outlet. It's going to take, 30 hours to recharge your vehicle, but it can be done. And by the way, you're paying for all of that, just so that you know. There are no charging stations.
And you've also exposed your entire home now to a rather lethal fire hazard.
Oh, yeah, because if the lithium-ion batteries in your car happen to catch on fire in your garage, that's a bad thing. So nobody wants it. I mean, there is a certain class of consumer who want them. And I presume they want them largely for purposes of virtue signaling, right? So
yes.
So pre-Twitter, Elon Musk was a darling of the left because of the Tesla. And so everybody could say, look, I have a Tesla and it works just fine for me. It's the future of automobiles. Meanwhile, you have Toyota saying this electric vehicle stuff is complete madness. And look, Toyota, I mean, they're just being upfront about it. Electric vehicles are not the way to go. They require too many heavy metals. There are too many safety problems associated with them in terms of fire, as you just mentioned, because you can have runaway thermal reactions in lithium-ion batteries. Hell, Samsung sold an entire line of phones that would conveniently explode in your pocket to prevent you from being bothered by incoming calls. So we know these problems exist. And as Toyota said, and as I mentioned before on the podcast, we can produce 15 hybrid vehicles for every EV. And hybrid vehicles get us to about 98% of our stated environmental goals. We are literally making
hybrids actually are they're good. You did you test drive? Didn't you test drive a hybrid at one point?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're not bad vehicles.
Look,
they're
the vehicles
I got no
that
problems with hybrids.
They're the vehicles that Formula One uses.
Yeah. So I mean, they have actually plenty of get up, and they make more sense because they give you more range, and you can fuel them without having to hook up. The gas actually powers the battery, so you've got the whole engine and recharging system all in one
package, and it uses far less gas and produces far less pollutants, because you don't have a big honking 1.6 liter 6-cylinder or 4-cylinder. You just have a little generator that is generating the electricity for the electric motors. So they're much more fuel efficient and give you the same range as a regular car. I mean, all the advantages
and you're not
are
sucking
obvious.
Electricity out of the local power
out of the grid
in order to do it.
Because we can't replace every car with EVs. We just can't. We don't have the electrical generation capacity.
This is the part that has never made any sense. You're just trading off gas stations for the local power station. Well, how is your local power station powered? It's most likely going to be natural gas or oil.
But what it won't
some
be,
places will be coal, and in very fewer places it'll be nuclear.
Actually, very fewer places it's going to be coal now, because the Biden administration wants all coal.
That's true. Yeah, that's
all
true.
coal-powered power plants shut down, and we will replace them with what exactly? Because if we shut them down, that is lost power generating capacity. So not only are we going to have to increase power generation to power all these electric vehicles, we're now going to have to increase power generation, and this is largely back east rather than here out west, but back east, there are a lot of coal-powered power stations that are just going to have to be shut down.
Yeah, there are more here. Yeah, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. Yeah. Even New York, although I think they've shut most, if not all of them, down by now. And the eastern seaboard is a mess when it comes to not necessarily power generation, but distribution. The network out here, and I mean, this makes sense when you think about it in terms of land. We also cover a lot of Canada. The grid covers Canada, New York, all of New England, all the way down here to Virginia. I mean, that's a large system, and it's also a very vulnerable system. You take out one small part of that, and it can shut down the entire eastern seaboard. So this is a fragile system, and we're working on the wrong parts of it. The end user part? No. We need to work on the delivery part. And shutting down sources of energy is not, I get it. Invention is the mother of necessity, right? Well, if you don't have that option, you don't have these options, you're going to have to figure something else out, aren't you?
And by the way, it's necessity is the mother of invention. It's a inversion.
What did I say?
You said invention is the mother of necessity.
Sorry.
Dear Lord, I hope that's not true.
Well, this is like, I always say the Queen of Marksbury
instead of the Marquess of Queensbury. The Queen of Marksbury said, you can't box that way. Also, by doing it on the consumer side, the burden that you're placing on people, and I guess the government has just decided that we can place as many burdens on the population as we want, as long as we don't bother the big business and utility companies.
It's diffused enough that you don't hear from large groups of people. You hear from smatterings, spread out. Whereas if you do it to the smaller number of producers, they can coalesce and create a huge problem.
Yes, and they can give money to your political opponents.
Right.
Yeah, Joe Blow in Nebraska is probably not going to do that. He's just going to grumble a lot and post on
And he'll get
Facebook.
dismissed as a crank,
Yeah,
and
post on
everybody that
Facebook.
calls him a Nazi.
Yeah, and yeah, you can let the culture take care of that. But the
Right.
burden that you're imposing on consumers, A, by buying what are, by any standards in terms of utility, objectively worse vehicles than what are already available.
Right.
And then I mentioned sort of, as a toss away, I guess you could plug your car into your 110 volt outlet, but in actuality, you can't.
Right.
Because if you use up your range, you probably need your car to go to work the next day. You don't have a 24, 25 hour charging cycle to trickle charge off of a 110 volt outlet. So if you really want to charge your vehicle in a way that makes it usable, you're going to have to spend additional thousands of dollars in modifications to your home to be able to charge that vehicle in a timely manner. So just the charging station is probably going to run you, I think the cheapest I've seen is like $2,500 for an installation.
Yeah, I was going to say it's between like $3,000 and $5,000, I think.
Yeah, but that's just the installation. That's just
right.
That's just putting it in your garage. Do I have a conduit that runs into my garage that can handle the required power output? Well, maybe not. So now I've got to run conduit through the house. Okay, that's not going to be cheap. Oh, and by the way, does my electrical panel support that level of power on any of the existing circuit breakers? Or am I going to need to expand the electrical panel for a new circuit breaker just for my car? Well, guess what? That's another extra couple of thousands of dollars. So on average, just to install in your garage a power station, a fast charging station, is probably going to run you $10,000. That is in addition to the $10,000 or $20,000 premium that you're paying for an electric vehicle.
Yeah. So you're spending 60 grand minimum on an EV. You're now going to increase your electric usage, so that utility's going up.
$10,000 on your house.
Right. And you're going to have to spend, and there's a lurking surprise for you when that battery, as all batteries do, they eventually, become useless.
Oh, that's right. We haven't even spoken about charging cycles and the number of charging cycles in a battery pack's lifetime. So at some point, you're going to have to trot down to your local dealership, and they're going to have to pull the top off of your car. If it's like the way that General Motors has theirs, they just have this entire subframe that's all battery, right? So you just pop the entire top of the car off, slide out the battery tray, and replace that battery tray. By the way, that battery tray costs about 20 grand.
Mm-hmm. Now.
Yeah, now.
It was 15 grand, 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah, it's about 20 grand now. It's only going to go up.
And that is every 5 years. So what do you do? Are you going to spend $20,000 on a new battery pack, or are you just going to trade the car?
Get a new car.
Because what's going to be more economic? Well, it's going to be more economic to trade it in. But what is the used car market going to look like for an 8-year-old battery-powered car that's just had a $20,000 battery replacement? Because you're going to have to do that or you can't resell the car. So what is that resale going to look like?
They've got to recoup what they bought it for, plus the repairs and maintenance. And so, you're almost buying a new car at that point. There's not going to be a whole hell of a lot of difference between the secondary market and the primary market.
Yeah, I can't see how there can be.
Right.
And you're not going to be able to sell it yourself, by the way, because if you just open up Auto Trader and say, okay, I've got an 8-year-old Chevy Volt that I want to sell. It has the original battery pack. Everybody knows they're going to have to spend 15 to 20 grand to get that replaced right off the top.
I got a lithium ion, factory in my backyard that I'd work at in my garage.
Yeah, you better, because
I just pump those things out.
Because that's the only way that you're going to get it for a decent price. So, I mean, it completely changes the economics of even how cars are bought and sold. Plus, now I've got these old battery packs. Now what do I do? How much of that is recyclable?
Well, yeah,
And how
that's
much
a
of
good
that?
question.
How much of
Because
that?
those are not easy minerals to come by. Um, and that's another thing that always bothers me about these enviros. Like, oh, but it's so much better for the environment if we use these lithium ion or nickel cadmium or whatever. Like, well, where do you think those things come from? Uh, what do you think about the little kids mining this stuff in the Congo? Uh, you know,
Yeah,
in
8-year-olds who are
Algeria.
working in open pit mines in Africa to get you your raw materials for that battery. And then, of course, there are the rare heavy metals that have to be used
That we have to get from China.
that we have to get from China. Yeah, exactly, because they essentially, well, for now,
For now, yeah,
although we appear to have found other. Speaking of necessity being the mother of invention, we found that big deposit.
you
It
got that
appears
backwards.
no necessity being the mother of invention. Necessity has pushed us to looking for more of these deposits. We found a huge one off the
Yeah.
coast of Japan, and we appear to have found one perhaps here in the United States, in continental United States. So I guess that's a good
Well,
thing.
God help us if we can actually get to it. But
And we have plenty of 8-year-olds in this country that we can put to work in our open pit mines to extract our lithium and what have you. So it's a win-win for everybody. Kids get money. We get
second look at
batteries.
open borders.
Well, that reminds me.
That was a good segue, right?
Speaking of segues, you sound like a professional, sir. No good answer for Biden as voters recoil over border crossings. People instinctively understand that there are no security measures at the border. We have no realistic way of preventing people from coming over. Well, let's put it this way. Our government is unwilling to implement any realistic proposals for stopping people from coming over the border. And as we also discovered this week, even when states do come up with what appear to be realistic measures, like the state of Texas and their anti-border crossing buoys, federal appeals court for the Fifth Circuit just says, hey, those buoys are illegal. Texas doesn't have the right to put those buoys up. Now, yeah. I've not read the opinion myself, but I am guessing here, and I think it's probably a pretty accurate guess, that they are depending on federal preemption to tell Texas they can't do anything.
It's more sort of. It's about navigable waterways and who has authority over. That authority is limited within the statute. So what the argument from Texas is that, these buoys don't affect anything that the statute says need to be worried about. So this is clearly outside of that purview. I happen to agree with Texas, but courts are often deferential.
So did Judge Willett, by the way.
Yeah, Willett, which, I mean, he is not a lefty by any means. So it is a tough question. It does need some really, really hashed out argument to delineate these things. And you're stepping into a pretty big issue here. So I'm not entirely surprised that the Fifth Circuit said, hey, look, this is a little beyond our call here. We have all this other law that says this. We recognize you think there's an exception here, but we don't have any confirmation that that's so. So if we make a ruling here, we're creating new law. That's really not our job. And I think they're going to let it go to the Supreme Court. What the Supreme Court does with it, I don't know. If they'll even hear it. They may decide that, this is just not an issue that we need to decide. So I'm not exactly shocked. I think it's wrong. I think that Texas should absolutely have that ability. I think it's a misinterpretation of the EPA's jurisdiction when it comes to navigable waterways. I don't even know that Rio Grande is a navigable waterway, although in the EPA's estimation, even a trickle over your driveway for a couple weeks a year is a navigable waterway. So I don't know. The legal case is interesting. It's a lot more involved than any of the news reporting is going to be able to really give you. The fact of the matter is, though, that the federal government is actively aiding and abetting border crossing by illegals and actively retarding the ability of states to do anything about it, including cutting razor wire.
Which, by the way,
on the shore.
Which, by the way, the federal government is just acting in defiance of the Immigration Act of 1986.
That's exactly right. So
it's the federal government being lawless here, not the state of Texas.
I agree. I mean, the buoys aren't that big a deal. I mean, they are a big deal as far as a deterrent. They're apparently very effective, but they're only like 1,000 yards or something. It's not even that much that's actually out there. The concertina wire, the rolls that are on the shore of Texas. So that's Texas land. Federal government's got nothing to do with it. The fact that the Border Patrol was going through and cutting it, and they got shot down by a court for doing that, and allowing illegals, like what federal purpose could there possibly be in line with law to cutting the concertina wire? Like there's no articulable reason for the federal government to do that. The only reason that makes any sense at all is that they want the illegals to come in. That's the only reason that anybody would do this. It's a pretty simple thing. Now, you and I know that that's exactly what they want, but if we're talking in the realm of proof and legal sense, you got to prove something. You have to show this is what's actually happening. I don't know what the federal government could possibly say to that. What we're worried about them getting hurt? Well, they wouldn't get hurt if they didn't come here illegally. I mean, Eagle Pass. There's actually not. There are actually a few different points of entry, legal points of entry, not far from there, but they don't use them.
Well,
and I don't know why.
It all comes down to, I think, and I wrote an article last week about immigration and demographics. And if you look at countries like Africa, this happens to be the population pyramid for Nigeria. That's a healthy, growing society. In fact, it is perhaps growing too healthily. Indeed, so is Africa as a whole, where it's looking like there'll be 3.9 billion people in Africa by 2100. But then when you look at the West, or countries like China, you have a wholly different demographic picture when you start looking at populations.
Yeah, the German one is a little scary.
Yeah, the German one is scary. So's the Chinese one. But you
I don't care about the Chinese.
The American one is better, but
barely.
Barely. It's showing that population is going to, by 2100, basically level off. And what that means is there's going to be a bunch of people in retirement age that are going to need to be supported, and there's going to be fewer workers to support them. And look, we can see that. We can see the demographic change that's going on from the 25 to 29-year-olds, and then look and watch as the pyramid begins to invert itself as you go to younger and younger people. So we're going to run out of people. So there is, in the West, for just demographic reasons alone. We don't even have to talk about George Soros and the WEF and all of that other stuff. Just for demographic reasons alone, you've got to be able to keep the Ponzi scheme of Social Security and other social welfare programs running. And you have to have enough workers that you can tax to do it. So even if there was nothing else going on, there would still be a lot of political pressure for immigration in the West simply because our demographics aren't great. They don't look good, and the future looks pretty dim in terms of maintaining our current social safety net that we have, especially in American terms, Social Security and Medicare, which you can't touch, by the way, because every time you try, you get politically savaged. Because if there's one thing you can say about retirees, by God, they vote, and they vote in far greater numbers than the general population proportionally. So you have that there. Then on top of that, you've got big businesses who want to keep wages low, obviously. And the best way to keep wages low is just to import those workers. You always hear the thing, we need these workers to do the jobs Americans won't do. Well, they're jobs Americans won't do at the current wage. They're not jobs.
That's the part that's always left off that statement.
Yeah, they're not jobs Americans won't do. They just won't do them for, peanuts. And
Right.
and it is, it's a look. It's basically an argument for a permanent underclass. Nobody says that. Nobody comes out and says we need a permanent underclass to pick our fruit and vegetables, and to clean our homes. And sometimes they'll inadvertently say that, like Nancy Pelosi a couple of weeks ago. Well, who's going to clean our houses? Okay. Occasionally they tell the truth.
I'm going to mow my lawn.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's an implicit argument for retaining a permanent underclass of immigrants.
At least in the 1800s, they were pretty explicit about that. They were like, you people are supposed to do your job. We do the good jobs.
Yeah, exactly. And so now we're saying the same thing, but we're hiding the ugly truth of it. And so there's a lot of political pressure on both the left and right to keep immigration open. And everybody talks about immigration, and everybody says how important it is, and everybody says how we need to control the border and for security and terrorism, but nobody ever actually does anything about it.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. There are so many interests aligned in the opposite direction. And even those of us who are, I'm perfectly open to immigration. I demographically, I think that's a good thing. I remember when, I guess it was like back 70s, 80s, maybe early 90s too, when we were getting accused of being a brain drain from places like Canada and England and France and Germany, and because you're just taking all our best people, and they come here, they want to come here, and we're happy to have them. But now we just let in the riffraff, and look, you mentioned the population explosion in Africa earlier. African immigrants, when they come to this country, generally do incredibly well. They're extremely hardworking. They embrace the American dream, and they become incredibly productive members of society. Let's get more from over there. Let's get fewer from these socialist hellholes, all the way down to freaking Patagonia. I'd much rather have people who would appreciate our system of government and our form of economy, not to mention our social norms, when they get here, than people who want to just change it or take it over or leave themselves in their own enclave, separate themselves out. I mean, look what happened to Europe. That has not worked out well. I mean, Ireland's got a bit of a row going on right now because of immigration. Britain has the same things. Sweden, Norway, and the Danish seem to have figured this out somewhat, and they're getting a lot of opprobrium from the EU people, but the simple fact of the matter is you cannot uh, what is it you always say about kids? It's the vertical integration of barbarians who need to be
Civilized.
assimilated, right? And that's what this is. This isn't a vertical integration. This is a wholesale just adoption of people who are not really meant to be here. They don't want anything here other than the services. It's free money, free healthcare, free school.
Yeah, which by the way,
a lot of times free housing.
Which by the way, didn't used to be. I mean, one of the things that Milton Friedman used to say about immigration is that, if you're going to have regular immigrants and then you're going to give them access to our social welfare program, they will tend to be a net drain on that. You'll attract the wrong kind of immigrants.
Right.
You can't have a welfare state and open immigration. He did note, however, but America has illegal immigrants. And at the time, they were not eligible for Social Security or Medicare or anything like that. All they could do is just come in and, perform labor and buy food and clothing and put, money into the economy and then leave. Or even if they did stay, they still never got to get Social Security. They never got Medicare. They never did anything. So from that perspective, from an economic perspective, illegal immigration was the best kind because they didn't have access to any of our social programs. But that's no longer true because nobody is coming in.
They didn't exist on the books.
Yeah, but nobody is coming in as an illegal immigrant now. They're all coming in as refugees.
Yeah, they're all asylees.
And so once you come
potential asylum.
Yeah, so once you come in and claim asylum, now there's this entire panorama of stuff that we give to you. Housing, so they're putting people in hotels, and even then they're not happy with the food that they're getting or the services that are being provided.
See, that's the kind of person that does not belong here at all.
Yeah.
Go back to your socialist country where they, take care of you from cradle to grave. You see how that works out. You want something here, you earn it.
Now, I will say this: the difference between immigration in America and and immigration in Europe is that in Europe, immigration is largely driven from Muslim countries, and so there is a cultural component or a cultural clash component to European immigration that in the United States we largely don't have because most of our immigrants and asylum seekers and whatever are coming from other Western countries. They may be, technically socialist and commie countries to one extent or another, but at least they're Western countries. So we don't have the same level of cultural misunderstanding that's the nicest term that I can apply to it, that they're having in countries like Ireland.
Well, yeah, and we're a much bigger country, and we're also a lot more religiously diverse. So it doesn't really matter here as much. I mean, most of Europe is still a lot of very small towns and enclaves of, people who've lived there forever, generations.
Yeah. And in America, I don't think anybody has lived anywhere for generations.
It's rare.
It is.
Yeah.
It's very rare. One final thing before we go that I did want to talk about because we are reaching the end of our time, and that is the 2 Second Amendment cases that are in front of the Supreme Court, one of which I don't fully understand, and the other of which I do, but I don't know what the answer is. The first is United States versus Rahimi. Now, this guy, Zaki Rahimi, is a piece of shit. And he's such a piece of shit, and he was so prone to violence that he got a restraining order put on him, and the state of Texas took away his gun rights while he was on this restraining order. And this piece of shit went into federal court and got his gun rights restored. So the guy is selling drugs. The guy's beating up his girlfriend to the point where she had to get a restraining order on him. He was not supposed to possess firearms. And then he's running around firing an AR-15 rifle into people's homes. I mean, this guy is a loser. This guy is the definition of, and I am not condoning this in any way, shape, or form, but this guy is the poster child of what still exists in Texas law as a defense for murder. He needed killing. In any event, he got his gun rights back, to the seeming disbelief of Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett. So we're going to figure out, I guess, in the Supreme Court, whether we can take your guns away because you've beat up your girlfriend and you have a restraining order placed against you. And is that enforceable? Does that affect your gun rights? That is case number one. Case number two is much simpler. It is the bump stock ban. Cargill versus Garland. Whether a bump stock device makes a semi-automatic rifle a machine gun, because with a bump stock device and the correct trigger control, you can essentially make a semi-automatic weapon fire in a manner very analogous to a fully automatic weapon. So those are the two cases. So I guess the only questions that are before us that we really need to answer in terms of what our opinions might be is, if you have a TRO placed on you, is it legitimate to take your gun rights away, especially if it's a TRO associated with violence?
I can't see why it wouldn't. I got to be honest. I am a firm Second Amendment advocate, and I do know that there are limits to that. I mean, obviously, if you're a prisoner, you're in jail. You don't have the right to have a firearm. You don't have the right to vote. You're limited, and you gave up that limitation. Or you acquired that limitation through a series of due process. So it seems to me that that's a legitimate reason for you to have your rights curtailed.
Well, the Fifth Circuit disagrees, and they struck down this state law in Texas, which prohibits people under restraining order from possessing a firearm.
I just don't understand the reasoning. Even if I'm sympathetic to it, I really think that if you've had due process, you've had the ability to make your case, and unless there was some mistake of law or mistake of fact, I don't see how that would violate your Second Amendment rights. You committed the acts. It was your choice, and your it was your own actions that created this situation. It's not the government just stepping in and saying, oh, you know what, you can't have guns because you're blah. Well, no, you need to actually try me individually, present me with your case, and allow me to put up a defense. That's due process.
Yeah, well, let's
take that.
Yeah, let's take a look at what this fellow does. So somebody who bought drugs from him said something nasty on social media. So he went over and shot an AR-15 at the person's house. The day after that,
that's standard.
The day after that, he got into a car accident, got out of his car, shot at the other driver, fled, returned to the scene, fired more shots at the other car, fled again. 3 days later, fired a gun in the air in a residential neighborhood in the presence of young children. A few weeks after that, somebody flashed their headlights at him, and he took exception to that, cut across the highway, followed the truck off an exit, and fired multiple shots at another car that had been traveling behind the truck. Finally, in January 2021, he pulled out a gun and fired multiple shots into the air after a friend's credit card was declined at a fast food restaurant. This guy is a piece of shit.
Yes.
He should not have guns. So, and I bow to no man in my respect and admiration for and intent on exercising my Second Amendment rights. Some people should be prevented from having guns. And people who are running around indiscriminately shooting at people are people who should be in jail, not people who should have a restraining order that prevents them from owning firearms overturned. I just don't get I myself don't get the reasoning. So I would hope that for the Supreme Court, they would say that, look, if you are prone to violence, if you have a history of violence and you get a TRO on you, then guess what? You don't get to keep your guns.
Yeah, exactly.
Some people should not be allowed to have guns. We're going to start off with the presumption that you're a rational, capable adult and that you have the perfect right and ability to own firearms. We will, however, leave open the possibility that you can prove to us that you were wrong.
Right.
And
I think that's a reasonable check by society on individual rights. I think that's well within the realm of what a civil society should be encouraged to do and allowed to do. I don't see that as violating an individual right. I see that as somebody throwing their individual right into the pot and then losing their hand.
Yeah, I mean, you have free speech, but we can also
place a gag order.
We can also place a gag order. We can sue you for defamation or what have you. I mean, there are, there are limits to there is the exercise of a right, the proper exercise of a right, and then there is an abuse of the right. And, not all rights can be abused. Obviously, I can't abuse the right not to testify against myself. I suppose I could live. I suppose I could say it, snarkily, and that would be wrong. But no, I'm not going to testify against myself. Yeah. So I could be an asshole about it, but you still can't make me testify. I can't abuse that right. But my right to swing my fist ends at your face, as they say. And my right to bear arms ends with me indiscriminately firing off rounds in public.
Once you become a menace to society, and you've literally shown that you cannot be trusted. Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, inebriated Plutarch in the chat says, how is that guy not in jail? Yes. How is he not in jail? I mean,
exactly.
His possession of firearms should be a moot issue.
A moot point. Exactly. Because he should be behind bars.
Because he should be spending 20 years plus in a penitentiary, not running around apparently and just firing indiscriminately in public on multiple occasions in a single year. So anyway, I think probably we both agree on that. The bump stock ban, on the other hand,
this whole thing is so stupid. It should have never become an issue to begin with. Yeah, I get it. I know it's because of Las Vegas.
Yeah,
but it's just so stupid.
Any idea on what the Supreme Court's going to say?
I expect they'll probably uphold it.
I suspect they will too. Because irrespective of the method of turning your semi-automatic into a full automatic firearm, it's been illegal since 1936. Well, not illegal. I mean, you can still own a fully automatic firearm in this country.
You can still own one now, yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing that stops you other than the rather laborious and expensive process of getting a federal tax stamp for the fully automatic firearm that you want to purchase. But I mean, you can still purchase it. I mean, hell, you can go to Las Vegas right now, fly right out there, go to a gun range, pick up an HK MP5 and dump a 30-round mag into a target 20 yards away. And everybody will be...
You can go to Vegas and jump in a tank, fire it, while shooting off your AR-15 or an M16 if you want to.
Yeah, it's perfectly legal in this country to own a fully automatic firearm. It's just super inconvenient.
Way expensive.
And yeah, very expensive. Thousands of dollars to get that federal tax stamp for one firearm.
Right.
But, the bump stock does seem, fully... First of all, and I'm talking from military experience here, there are obviously situations in which fully automatic fire is warranted and justified. It's excellent for providing cover and fire, so covering fire for maneuvering and advancing and setting up, escapes from ambushes and assaulting ambush points. Yeah, there are specifically military situations in where that is useful. In general, though, even in a military context, certainly the United States military concentrates on single-aimed shots, the individual rifleman as a marksman. And I think that's probably the most effective way of using a firearm. I just don't see in the normal course of events in civilian life where a fully automatic firearm is needed or is even useful in most situations. However, the Second Amendment doesn't depend on utility, right? It only depends on your right to bear arms. So I'm rather conflicted on this. I personally don't like the idea of anybody being able to go buy a bump stock and then having the ability to fire full auto like the guy in Las Vegas did. I mean, he killed 50 some people in the space of a very short period of time. So, I mean, it is a technology that certainly has some downsides and social costs to allowing it. And I do think that this type of device that is attached to a firearm does render it to be fully automatic. So I think in terms of federal law, it is illegal. Although you can get a federal tax stamp if you want a bump stock, I presume. Just as you can
I would rather they just put the bump stock into that category rather than trying to make it entirely illegal. And the thing is that, as many people pointed out back when this issue first came up after Las Vegas, you can do the same thing with the strap from your gun. I mean, you're literally just bouncing the gun off of something in order to make it, and just keeping your finger rigid.
Yeah,
so the gun actually is operating itself.
Yeah, you're depending on recoil and your finger position to just fire it in a fully automatic way, which, by the way, you could technically do with, well, you wouldn't be able to support it with your front hand, but you could actually take your left hand and do that and put it in the trigger guard and just hold it right there. And it would probably relatively reliably fire semi-auto. There's a couple of things that you can do to a semi-automatic weapon that will get it to fire as if it was an automatic weapon. And you don't need any special equipment to do that, by the way. It does take a little training, takes a little practice, but I mean, you could do it. But I think that on the whole, I would classify bump stocks as basically a device to turn a semi-automatic firearm into a fully automatic firearm.
It's not the same as
I wouldn't ban it,
filing down the firing pin, but
but I mean, I wouldn't ban it. I would just say, okay, well, look, it's going to make your firearm fully automatic, so you need a tax stamp for it.
That makes the most sense to me. You know, it's, even if it's ultimately useless, if this is what makes people happy, fine, whatever. Throw it into that category.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with restricting access to fully automatic weapons. I mean, I think fully automatic weapons are fairly useless to begin with, but
yeah, you know, just having qualified with the M16 on a regular basis as a military policeman, not a fan of even the M16 on fully automatic fire. I mean, I know what my man sight, because when you shoot fully automatic, at least in our qualification with the M16, it was a man-sized target, and it was just a silhouette, and they just counted the number of hits. And it has to be in the 10 ring or whatever. Anything on the target counts as a hit, right? And so when you fired fully automatic, I think you fired a 30-round magazine, and you had to have 12 hits on the target. So that automatically, at 25 yards, by the way, or 35 yards, I forget what it was exactly. But I mean, that automatically tells you how accurately you can use the M16, which has a fairly low recoil, but you know, on fully automatic at 750 rounds a minute, that's a hell of a lot of muzzle climb. So you can only fire in short, real short bursts, because if you just let her go, she'll climb.
Well, that's why the select fire with the 3-round burst, that makes a lot more sense. I mean, like you said earlier, there can be times, suppression fire, where an automatic weapon makes sense, where you're not necessarily trying to kill the other guys, but at least keep them down.
Yeah, you're throwing enough lead their way so that it makes them really hinky about sticking their head up.
Right.
But you don't know whether or not you're going to actually shoot anybody when you do that. You're just trying to throw lead downstream. So you pull out your saw and you just start rocking and rolling. So usually so that you can maneuver into an assault position and then assault whoever's shooting at you. But automatic fire is just hard to control. It's just not super effective in most cases. Your first round usually goes where you want it. Your second round is usually a bit higher. And look, if it's anything other than an M16, your rounds just go freaking everywhere.
Get Tech 9 or a Mac 10 or something. Remember when, like back in the 80s, when all the drug cartels down in Miami and wherever, and you'd hear about these attacks that one gang did on another, and almost none of the guys they were actually aiming at actually got killed. It was always innocent bystanders. Like it's just not a useful weapon tactically. It may be intimidation wise, but
but I mean, if you're really,
I don't want an automatic weapon in my house. That's not something I would defend my household with. I mean, I just as soon hit my own kid as I would the actual person assaulting the house.
Yeah, generally the U.S. military's idea of aimed single shots is the most effective method of employing a firearm in most cases, and certainly in nearly every case in which civilians are involved with firearms.
Yeah.
But with that, I think we're done. We are pushing 2 hours on this thing, an hour and 45 minutes.
Shit. Okay.
I mean, people have to go to the bathroom and people have to get dinner and stuff, so we got to shut up. So have a great week, Michael. We'll talk to you again next time.
All right, buddy. Bye, everybody.
You've been watching the Observations podcast for the 3rd of December, 2023. Thanks for joining us on this podcast. We always appreciate the fact that you do. I apologize for not actually starting the live stream when I was supposed to. You just missed a wonderful introduction. Fortunately, I figured that out less than 5 minutes in, so you did get the majority of the podcast. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next time. So long.